All right. Good evening. We're going to start the Hastings Planning Commission meeting for November 27th. Call the meeting to order. All right. First up, approval of minutes from November 13th meeting. Any comments?
Mr. Chair,
Sure, go ahead.
I voted against the number 3.
Yep.
Thanks, John.
Okay, perfect. Any other corrections? All right. With the exception of that change, we'll go ahead and consider the minutes to be approved. All right. First order is the public hearing. City of Hastings Ordinance Amendment 2022-10-MRCCA. Staff report by Justin Fortney. Justin?
All right, thank you very much. The MRCCA is the Mississippi River Corridor Critical Area. I'll likely refer to it as the MRCCA from here on. It's a 72-mile corridor along the Mississippi River through the Twin Cities, including Hastings, of course. Originally, it was created in the 1970s, but this is the first time there'll be uniform local regulations guiding the planned corridor. The ordinance itself was developed at the state level for adoption by local cities and townships for enforcement and carrying out the corridor regulations. The DNR has approved the draft ordinance that's being presented, which is pretty much directly what was the draft or the template ordinance, with some minor changes to more closely relate to the Hastings area. The purpose of the regulation is to maintain natural and scenic character and minimize negative impacts to riparian areas and bluffs. This is accomplished by additional development regulations beyond the zoning, floodplain, and shoreline management ordinances that are already in effect for much of the same locations. The Planning Commission is asked to hold a public hearing, review the proposal, and make recommendations to the council for the following items. The new ordinance, which will be Chapter 152A, MRCCA, amend the official zoning map chapter with MRCCA overlay districts, and make amendments to 2 existing regulations related to weeds and grasses. Those fall under the zoning code and property maintenance. To get into a little bit specifics of some of the aspects of the MRCCA ordinance are some of these items listed here, and I'll go through some of them with some examples. As far as setbacks, the existing setbacks of items that have requirements would be grandfathered, and new ones going by the districts for structures and impervious surfaces would be, from the ordinary high water level, would be from these different districts, which I'll go through in a little bit more specific case by or of the districts in a minute here. But the ROS district, it would be 200 feet from the ordinary high water level. The RN 100 feet. RTC 75 feet. And those would be from the Mississippi River. The ROS also has a 150-foot setback requirement from the Vermilion River. And then from the bluff line setback, the ROS has a 100-foot setback, and the others 40-foot setback. If a new structure has a similar scale as adjacent ones, it may also conform to those existing setback of those structures on those adjacent lots. Height limits, the ROS is 35 feet, RN is 35 feet, the SR just is whatever the underlying zoning is, but may also not be visible from the ordinary high water level as viewed from the opposite shore at the ordinary high water level. And the RTC, which is the downtown area of Hastings, would be 47 feet, roughly the height of the Finch building. And a conditional use permit would allow for up to a 65-foot building. These regulations have some limitations on lot size. For the ROS, it's 200 feet wide, and the minimum lot area would be what's required for development on the lot to maintain setbacks without a variance. There's notice requirements of the ordinance to the DNR and the National Park Service, and in some instances, adjacent local governments were applicable. Those would be for not only changes to the ordinance, but for applications for variances and conditional use permits and development. There's some additional land use regulations related to, or beyond zoning, and they would relate to, for agricultural, there's some crop buffer requirements for perennial ground cover. There's some land use regulations for feedlots, forestry, non-metallic mining, river-dependent uses, and communication towers. There's performance standards for some private and public improvements. Just for some quick examples, those would be like roads, driveways, parking areas, and they're required to be designed to take advantage of natural vegetation, topography, to reduce visibility from the river, comply with structure setback requirements, and not be placed within bluff impact zones or short impact zones, unless it's one of the exempt uses at the very end of the ordinance. Additionally, private access paths must be no more than 8 feet wide, and then in the short impact zone, no more than 4 feet wide, 8 feet wide or 4 feet wide, within a bluff impact zone. There's some other related items for regulating water-oriented accessory structures, decks, patios, in setback areas, signs, fences, and lighting in some areas. Another major component of this ordinance is vegetation management. Permits are required except for maintenance and emergency situations, public right-of-way maintenance, agricultural and forestry activities, selective vegetation removal of dead, dying, diseased, or hazardous vegetation. Also, individual tree and shrub and invasive non-native species can also be removed without permits. Land alteration standards and stormwater management. There's a large section on those. Just for some quick examples, permits are required for land alteration. Work below the ordinary high water level is permitted through the DNR and the Corps, as has always been required. The construction of riprap for areas above the ordinary high water level requires city permits and must be to correct an established erosion issue. Maintenance and repair of riprap above the ordinary high water level does not require a permit. Large subdivisions and development standards are applicable to large developments of 10 and 20 acres. Exemptions to certain heights, locations are listed at the back of the ordinance. Those include just some brief examples: bridges, silos, flagpoles, access ramps, and similar type uses. The overlay districts I mentioned to a little bit earlier include the rural and open space, the ROS district. It includes undeveloped and rural, low-density development areas. They're adjacent and visible from the river, as well as large undeveloped tracts of high ecological and scenic value, and include a lot of floodplain. They're intended to sustain and restore natural character and protect habitat, open space, and river corridor views. The River Neighborhood RN is primarily residential neighborhoods that are adjacent or visible from the river with limited commercial development. They're intended to maintain the character of the river corridor within the context of existing residential development. And the purpose of those districts is to minimize erosion and the flow of untreated stormwater into the river and enhancing the shoreline vegetation. The River Towns and Crossings RTC district is primarily the downtown area. There is for historic downtown areas and limited nodes of intense development at specific river crossings, including taller buildings. They're managed to allow continued growth and redevelopment in those limited areas at river crossings to accommodate compact, walkable development patterns and connections to the river. The purpose of those districts is to try to restore the natural vegetation in those riparian areas, and tree canopies are priorities of that district. And lastly, in Hastings is the separated from river, the SR district. This district is intended to cover lands that are not readily visible from the Mississippi River. And the purpose of these districts is to try to manage and minimize negative impacts to primary conservation areas and minimize erosion and flow of untreated stormwater into the Mississippi River. And this is the proposed overlays. The yellow would be the RN, the river neighborhood. Brown is the river town crossings. The green is the ROS, rural open space, and then the dark yellow or orange is separated from the river districts. Additionally, that ordinance requires native and natural vegetation to be maintained where it exists, and also where there's intended land alterations and where ground cover is required. Those requirements aren't compatible with some existing ordinance provisions that the city has requiring certain maintenance activities of grasses and weeds, which would be a maximum grass height requirement and not allowing vegetation to go to seed. As a result, we are looking to remove provisions in the sign code that happen to mention brushes and high grass and weeds aren't allowed near signs, and that adding an exemption under property maintenance requirements for ground cover vegetation within the MRCCA overlay district. That ordinance currently requires certain maintenance requirements for grass, and those would not be enforced on properties that are within the MRCCA overlay district. As far as public input and the open house we held, staff mailed about 170 informational notices to affected property owners explaining the proposal, and included links to information, including the maps of the districts and the resources, and provided notice to attend the open house and the Planning Commission public hearing tonight. Staff received a few inquiries through email and phone regarding the proposal, and about 20 to 25 residents attended the open house on November 13th. The draft proposal was presented. There was some question and answer time as a large group, and then afterwards some folks stayed for a specific in-depth review kind of their individual properties with questions they had. And then lastly, as you see on the Diaz, I placed a letter from the Friends of the Mississippi River providing a suggestion that optional language to the variance section would require some additional written findings for variance approval. Staff had chosen to propose only the required language in the template ordinance. The written findings are already required, including written findings that the variance be consistent with the purpose of the entire MRCCA ordinance. The suggested additional findings are very subjective and not well relatable to variances specifically. Staff had suggested using those written findings for the conditional use permits because they're more relatable to uses than to variances. The letter also recommends that we provide longer notice than the template ordinance requirement of 10 days to agencies for those required notices when we're going to be reviewing applications or changes that require notice. The letter indicated that a 10-day notice period often means that the agency input is received very close to or even during a planning commission meeting. Staff provides these notices as soon as a date for a meeting is known, and of course, no less than 10 days. And we provide those electronically. Lengthening the notice period for all instances would delay applications. When there are large and complicated projects, or if staff or agencies require additional information, we do hold those applications back from bringing them to Planning Commission, or if something comes up at the last moment, they can and usually are tabled for further information. If we lengthen the time of the notice requirement, that would delay a lot of the applications, but it would still require us to continue to hold back the more complicated ones, because generally that, even if we chose 15 days or 20 days, that oftentimes is not enough for a large project that has a lot of back and forth or additional information needed. Staff believes that more would be lost than gained by changing that notification period, which is a typical notification period that we do have for other notices required for other ordinances for agencies. With that, I can stand for any questions. And there is a public hearing requirement, and I do believe a representative from the Friends of the Mississippi River was going to come tonight and offer any comments.
All right, thanks, Justin. Yep, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. All right, if anybody wishes to speak, if you could just come up to the podium, state your name and either your address if you're local or your organization that you're with.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Colleen O'Connor Toberman with Friends of the Mississippi River. I'm the Land Use and Planning Director there. Thank you, Justin, for your summary of FMR's comments and your response to them. It's great to hear that the city has a practice of giving agencies as much notice as possible, even if it's not possible to codify a longer notification period in your ordinance, because we share your experience in observing how other cities have implemented this, that when you get the DNR in particular involved, you can get into a lot of really technical and legal stuff that takes some time to work through before it shows up at a public hearing and makes the hearing confusing. I will note that our other recommendation to add some more language to your variance findings is something that several other cities have done. Many cities have adopted the same required language for both variance and CUP findings. And in our experience, adding that specificity has been helpful in the decision-making process. It gives, both property owners and developers, as well as neighbors, a clearer idea of how a proposal is going to be assessed, what criteria are expected to be met. A lot of places along the river are places that people feel really strongly about and hold very dear. And so the more you can kind of set a process that is clear to everyone about what criteria will be used, I think the easier it is to consider new projects along the river. So all I wanted to share tonight. Thank you so much for taking up this ordinance. And if it's appropriate, if there are any questions, I'm happy to respond to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll hold on to the questions for a moment here, see if there's anybody else that wishes to speak. Anyone on Zoom? Nope. Nobody else? Okay. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and then we'll go ahead and open it up to commissioners for questions and comments. Oh, Commissioner McGrath, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. In doing some reading of the letter that was left today, there is a reference to Minnesota State Statute 30.02, and I fully acknowledge I'm not a legal expert, but I am not able to pull that website up on the state legislator's website. It looks like it was repealed, and I was just wondering if that if there's a current statutory reference we could take a look at.
Commissioner McGrath, I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, that reference, which is at the top of the second page in italics, was something I copied out of the city's draft ordinance. Is that correct?
That's a local Hastings ordinance that deals with commission responsibilities and variances.
Okay, good catch. I would have missed that myself. Commissioners, any other questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Tenkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a few. We notify people as soon as we can, right? It's not, we don't wait till 10 days, we just, whenever we're ready in that process.
Yeah, I mean, we would notify somebody as soon as we knew which meeting it was going to be going towards, yeah.
And then the weed ordinance, so the stuff in yellow is the stuff that contradicts with what the DNR wants, is that what? we're
Yeah,
doing this?
generally, yes.
And then all we're really doing is allowing them to have higher grass and weeds and let that go to seed?
Yep, correct.
Okay. And then the CUP process is, was brought up in this letter about adding some more language. The language that's in here, is that the same that we use for any other process, regardless of the zoning district?
Which language are you
So-
specifically?
In the Friends of the Mississippi, they have the variance application, the CUP process, and they want us to change the language from what you have in here to what they have. And what I'm asking is what we have in here, the same language we have for the rest of the properties in the city?
Well, up at the top of that page, that 30.02 outlines our variance process.
Okay.
So that has all those findings that you normally see with a variance staff report.
big long list, yeah.
So those are required findings that have to be made based on that local ordinance of ours for variances. So we'll have to make those, and they're suggesting that we make those specific additional ones, A, B, and C.
Okay.
In addition to written findings that the variance request meets the intent of the ordinance itself, which is how we have it worded now, is that the findings required for, that it's consistent with the intent of the ordinance. They're suggesting that we also do these three compound items as additional written findings.
Okay. Thank you, because, I mean, it's a very complicated matter, right? Especially around variances. And there's a lot of legalities. I just want to make sure that we're treating this the way we treat the rest of if we approve it as presented to us, it's treating it the same way we treat the rest of the city. Correct. Okay.
Add one thing further to that, too. And when we take a look at conditional use permits, the purpose of a conditional use permit is to set specific conditions for parameters of operation. So the more specificity that we can present is good for being able to provide for how one can operate and it being most consistent with the ordinance at hand. When we're dealing with a variance, we're dealing with a legal issue. And it's been a court-challenged issue that has had due stipulations in the last few years in which there are specific items that are laid out and what one must meet to have a variance be granted. And those things, as you all recall, come forward to you with variance applications. I do have some concern about adding other items to that we don't have for other variances, because we're putting ourselves at somewhat of a legal jeopardy of being more selective on granting a variance than we do in other land use regulations. So I do have some positive hesitancy in that. I understand what the Friends of the Mississippi River is doing in that one, and I understand the need to be specific in that. But when I get to be specific regulations within the code and the sensitivity and the legal challenges that can come with a variance, I do pause with some hesitancy in that.
And that was my point. Thanks for pointing that out. I want to make sure we're treating everybody the same, regardless of what district they're in within the city. So, yeah, I don't think I'd support making a special case for one district over another. And variances are very, very limited in when we can approve them, so. I think that was all the questions I had right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Commissioners? Justin, how many properties are affected by this in Hastings? How many riverfront properties do we have?
Well, it's not just riverfront properties.
Or just in this total?
I mean, they're affected more than others, but I mailed out about 170.
170? Okay.
I think it's important to note here, too, that the Mississippi River Critical Corridor ordinance here is in addition to the floodplain ordinance and the shoreline ordinance that we presently have in place. Those don't go away, those still stay in place, but there is additional regulations that would be present for the property shown on the map here. Those properties now, for the most part, are affected either by floodplain and/or shoreland for the most part in there. So there's already specific regulations pertaining to land use and proximity to river and clearing. There's more specificity certainly in the MRCCA, but we're not establishing anything that's dramatically new, I don't think, within this.
Okay. Thanks, John. Commissioner Halberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, real quick, with having the shoreline and the floodplain in this, there's no chance of anything, being convoluted, superseding, causing confusion moving forward. They all flow pretty well together, pardon the pun.
Justin, do you have any comments on that?
Well, it'd be better if they were all one thing, but they're not, and they, for the most part, can't be. One thing that'll help, is having a overlay district map, with everything shown on there to make sure that anytime there's a request on a property, that it's plain to see all the different hoops they have to jump through and everything that has to be reviewed. And just go, one ordinance at a time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Commissioners, any other questions, comments? Mine were answered by the two questions that you asked, so took care of that.
I'll make a motion, but I'll just make a comment before that. I have property on a lake, and I know there's a ton of regulations and stuff that what you can do and what you can control. So I totally I get this, and I'm in support of it. My daughter actually took a class in 1930s, 20s. They did a fish survey, and they found 3 fish from St. Paul to Hastings in the Mississippi River because it was so polluted. And thank God we're not in that situation anymore. So people are dumping all their sewage and everything else right into the river. So I'm in support of it. I also understand property owner rights, but I think, reading through this, that we're not really impacting too much of what people have already today. So I'm in support of this, and I'll make a motion that we recommend approval of ordinance amendment 2022-10 MRCCA.
Now, do you want to include 1 through 4 in that, or you want to take them
No.
individually? We have 4.
All
in front of us.
4.
All 4 of us? Okay. So
Thanks.
the motion is to approve the recommendation and number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Second,
I'll second.
Commissioner Halberg, any new discussion? Okay, no new discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion carries.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, the first reading of that will go before the City Council on December 4th. That'll be a consent agenda item. And then the second reading, final adoption, would be before the City Council on December 18th.
December 18th? Okay. All right, thank you. And thank you for coming. Thank you. Under other actions, we're continuing the City of Hastings Ordinance Amendment 2023-45, Cannabis and Hemp.
We are. As planning commissioners recall from the last meeting, there was a public hearing held to amend the zoning code to have changes in our performance standards for cannabis businesses. At that time, there was some discussion pertaining to differences between different zoning districts that was confusing, and I spoke to the city attorney about that. and we simplified that. Right now, the only section of the code that would be changing would be to remove the restriction of intoxicating cannabis products being sold at exclusive liquor stores and on-sale liquor establishments. So right now, if you own a liquor store or a bar, you can't sell cannabis products. With this change, you would be able to do so. There wouldn't be a prohibition on that. That would be the only change. There wouldn't be anything in there pertaining to differences in zoning districts that we discussed at the last meeting. So you can stand for any questions.
Thanks, John. Commissioner Tyken, go ahead.
Thanks, John, for kind of clearing that up. And this, I was reading about this after our last meeting. This is in line with what the state kind of approved?
It is, it
Okay.
is. And we're taking a little more precautionary approach to it by having stuff within the zoning code as well as our licensing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Commissioners, any other questions or comments? All right. All right, if none, I'll take a motion to approve or otherwise.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance amendment 2023-45, cannabis and hemp.
All right, Commissioner Tyken, motion to approve. Second? Commissioner Grass, all right.
Second.
Second, all right. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Same schedule on that one as well, December 4th. First reading before City Council, consent agenda item, and second reading and adoption coming up on the 18th of December. So that's what we have there.
Perfect. All right. And looks like we have other business.
Other business here, we had a council meeting last week. They did approve the comprehensive plan amendment for the South Oaks 4th edition, so that's going through the procedures right now, becoming finalized. Looking at our schedule coming up the rest of the year, we don't have anything scheduled for our next meeting on December 11th. And the December 26th meeting that we would have scheduled on Tuesday, I've historically not held, so I'm not planning to hold a meeting in late December here. So if we don't have a meeting on the 11th, the next meeting we would have would be in January. Other items that are out there right now, coming up to council, there is an environmental assessment worksheet pertaining to what's called Walden and Hastings, that the annexation area off of Highway 316. What an EAW does, it goes through some environmental impacts of the proposed development. So that's been prepared, and the action by the council will be to release it for distribution, not to make any assessments on it. We'll have other public entities, they'll comment on it, bring those comments back at the beginning of the year and move forward from that. Along with that, there's plans from the development firm there to have land use applications pertaining to development of the subdivision upon completion of the EAW. Those may come over the winter from talking to the entity there on when they're bringing things forward. And then as far as the planning commission goes in terms, there's 4 of you that have said yes. The four commissioners that are up for reappointment have all agreed to be reappointed, which I thank you for. We will have that happen at council on December 18th as well. Consent agenda item, no need to be present for that. I don't think we've ever been in a position of not reappointing anyone who wants to be reappointed. And then we still have a vacancy on planning commission. It's been difficult to find people, but for some reason today, 3 people came forward. So hopefully we'll be able to find someone and have someone appointed here at the beginning of January. So that's all I have.
Okay, thanks. Commissioners, any other business? Nope. If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Right,
So moved.
Commissioner Tyken, motion to adjourn, second.
Second.
Commissioner Grath, all in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, opposed?